Oliver Harris came to Ohio in 1810 when wolves hunted the hollows and mountain lions prowled the ridgelines. He built a life where the wind could kill you, and a prayer might be all you had. The road he followed is still there, paved now, but the trees still lean in like they've been listening for centuries. He arrived with 4 children, a wagon load of hope, and one prayer. Oh, that the Lord would go with us and make us to glorify Him in the wilderness. This is the real Wild West, a place that didn't welcome settlers, it tested them. And this is the story of one man who didn't just survive the frontier, he wrote it down. Throughout this video, I'll be reading from his diary just as he wrote it, over 200 years ago. On Monday, I packed up my things and put them into the wagon and started for the state of Ohio. It was cloudy. The wind was southwest. Oh, that the Lord would go with us and make us to glorify Him in the wilderness. April 30th, 1810. He traveled with his wife Amy and their 4 children, Hosea, Hannah, Mary, and Eliza, alongside Joel Behrman and his family, Uncle Joel Van Meter, and others. It wasn't just a journey, it was an exodus. They left behind everything familiar, chasing the promise of land and providence on the Ohio frontier. They crossed the Susquehanna, climbed South Mountain, pulled heavy wagons over rutted trails where wild vines choked the path and roots reached up to trip the wary. Children walked when the oxen slowed. Wheels broke. Food wore thin. Spirits frayed. At night, they camped in deep woods thick with wolves. Gray wolves circled the camps after dark, their eyes catching the firelight, their howls carrying low across the hollows. Every traveler kept a flintlock rifle close, a good knife within reach, and prayers on their lips. The forests were no gentler in the daylight. Panthers, what settlers called mountain lions, still prowled the ridgelines, silent and deadly. It wasn't uncommon for travelers to feel the prickle of unseen eyes following them, or to hear the faint snap of a branch that didn't break by accident. No child wandered far from camp. No adult slept soundly. The breath held a little tighter, the hands wrapped a little closer around the musket stock. They traveled through storms and stony roads, rested when they could, and Oliver's entries turned sparse when the weather turned cruel. May 6th came through Columbia, crossed the Susquehanna, traveled 11 miles. It was clear. May 8th roads very stony and rough, came 21 miles today. By early June, they floated west down the river through Wheeling and Manchester, and finally, after weeks of exhaustion and silent prayers spoken in the dark. I started from Manchester for Newmarket, got to the place about 10 o'clock in the evening, and went into Uncle Jonathan Behrman's house. June 8th, 1810. No welcome party, no rest yet, just sore hands, tired feet, and the wild frontier around them. But they had arrived, and the real story was about to begin. By morning on June 9th, 1810, Oliver was walking the hills with his uncle, getting his first good look at the land that would become home. But this wasn't farmland. Not yet. It was wild, untamed. The woods around Newmarket were deep and dark, the kind that watched you back. Black bears wandered the hollows. Wolves hunted in packs. Then, of course, you also had the mountain lions. The nights weren't silent. They were alive, with howls, snaps, eyes in the trees. This wasn't just unsettled land. It was a place that hadn't yet decided whether it wanted settlers. On June 11th, he helped clean oats in the rain. A few days later, he was building a table to eat on and a bench to sit on, gathering seed corn, cutting wood, and mending roofs. They hunted squirrels, planted potatoes, and shot a bear out the front door. And on June 21st, the real turning point. I helped run out 125 acres of land and got a deed of Henry Massey and also a town lot of 3 acres and paid him $250. The land was chosen. A home would follow. Houses in those days were simple. 1 room, maybe 2. Logs stacked tight, chinked with clay, floors packed with dirt or worn plank. Leaky when it stormed, cold in winter. But they held fire and family. Clothes were homespun, linen in the summer, wool in winter, patched, reused, handed down. Shoes, if you had them, were a luxury. In 1811, a schoolhouse was built on land owned by Michael Stroup and Samuel Knox. The schoolhouse was modest, lit by firelight and daylight. Children walked to class through snow and mud, and on fair days they'd picnic near a quiet grove they called God's Garden, just a short walk from the school. The land demanded much, but it gave back just enough to make staying possible. Surviving the winters. The winters didn't just come, they attacked. Blizzards rolled off the hills, swallowing cabins and snowdrifts taller than a man. Roads vanished, trees split under ice, families huddled by the fire, burning every last log they'd split in the fall. If you didn't cut enough wood, you bargained for it. If the cellar went bare, you stretched what little you had. Cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans. The lucky ones had venison. The unlucky had prayer and hunger. Oliver rarely wasted words on hardship, but the long, silent stretches in his diary said enough. Days when even a steady man laid down his tools and prayed the roof would hold. Yet survival wasn't just what you endured. It was what you gave back when the storm passed. In August of that same year, Oliver lent his wagon to a man named Vance. A small favor, barely noted, but one that stitched two families together for generations. I hauled my hay and let my wagon to Mr. Vance to move from Kentucky. August 13th, 1814. No contracts, no promises. Just one neighbor stepping in where he was needed. That's how frontier communities were built, not with speeches or steeples, but with loaned wagons, shared oats, barn raisings, and prayers muttered over shallow graves. In Harris's world, surviving winter meant more than chopping wood. It meant standing shoulder to shoulder when the storm came, and still being there when the thaw returned. Oliver didn't think his life was remarkable. He rose before dawn, fixed what was broken, gave thanks for dry shoes, a full woodshed, and a prayer answered in silence. Each diary entry is a thread. Woven together, they form something stronger than memory, a life worth remembering. The land was still raw. Between 1810 and 1815, Ohio was still wild. Statehood was young. Highland County was a patchwork of trails and timber, where the memory of moccasins and militia boots still clung to the ground. Kenton's trace cut northwest across the county, while Boone's trail slipped up from the Kentucky hills. Oliver Harris likely walked both. He traveled through Cynthiana and Lexington, Boone's country, and surely heard the stories of Simon Kenton, the long-legged frontiersman who escaped death more times than most men survived battle. Out on those trails, you didn't walk alone. The woods watched you. Wolves moved low along the ridgelines. Panthers slipped through the shadows, lean and silent. It wasn't uncommon to see one cross your path, yellow eyes locked on you, tail twitching slow. You didn't flinch, you didn't run. You kept walking, one hand on your flintlock, another on your faith. Maybe that's why Oliver sometimes wrote of stillness, of silence, of the uneasy press of something just beyond the trees. He never named it, but he felt it. If you measured Oliver Harris's life by numbers, it wasn't the crops or the miles that stood out. It was the meetings, church meetings, prayer meetings, schoolhouse gatherings, visits to the sick, votes on unruly neighbors. Some happened in barns, some in cabins, some out in the woods while the storms broke over the ridgelines. Oliver showed up to nearly all of them, weathered, worn, tired, or busy. Because this wasn't just a man with a plow, it was a man tied to every root of his community. Frontier justice and tornadoes. Oliver Harris didn't just farm the land, he helped shape the law. He served on the grand jury in 1813, 1826, and again in 1840, not just a witness to frontier justice, but part of its machinery. On Monday, I went to Hillsborough to serve on the petite jury. I was placed on a trial. William Price was indicted for burglary. He was found guilty and sentenced to the penitentiary for 3 years. He is a colored man. The jury was called to try George Morris for stealing gears, harness, etc. The jury sent out near night and made up their verdict of not guilty about 8 o'clock at night. I got my pay for serving as juror, $1 per day, then walked home. March 9th through the 19th, 1840. The Harris farm didn't just raise wheat, it raised people, children, preachers, neighbors who would walk 5 miles through snow just to argue a verse from Hosea. The schoolhouse, later torn down and moved to make room for a home, was proof that nothing here stayed still for long. Even the dead had to shift. The cemetery, once part of the Harris land, now Sanders Cemetery, holds the names Oliver wrote again and again: Gossett, Vance, Boatman, Springer, Van Pelt. Sometimes kin, sometimes just neighbors, always rooted in place. January 20th, 1841. I went to J. Vance's infant son's burying and got a greatcoat cut out. Life didn't pause for grief. There was always something to mend: stitch a coat, patch a roof, dig a grave, pray. Later that month, during his son Robert's wedding dinner, someone sheared the tails off Oliver's horses, an act he blamed, without humor, on evil itself. All was well, except the horses' tails was sheared by some evil-disposed person under the influence of the devil. February 5th, 1841. By November, tensions flared again. This time it was closer to home, his daughter-in-law. This evening, Robert's wife gave me the most ridiculous talk I ever had from the tongue of a mortal. It proves the tongue is an unruly member and is set on fire of hell. November 5th, 1841. That was Oliver, worn thin but not worn out. He feared God. He respected storms. He trusted Scripture more than sentiment. And when the frost set in deep or the aches got too fierce, he stayed home. On Sunday, I stayed at home because of extreme cold and infirmities of age. January 17th, 1841. In the steady rhythm of his records, you feel it. A life lived not for show, but for survival, for legacy. When the sky turned, this was a hard land. If the winters didn't break you, the storms tried. Around the 1830s, a tornado ripped through New Market, taking the meeting house with it, the very house Oliver had helped raise from the first fired bricks on his farm. The building shattered, roof beams splintered. But the people stayed, and they rebuilt. Faith wasn't something you spoke about much here. You hammered it back into place when the wind tore it down. Older trails, older stories. Before Oliver ever planted a row of oats, there were trails here, not drawn by cartographers, but worn by moccasins, hooves, and blood. Kenton's Trace ran north from the Ohio River, slicing past Hillsborough and curling near New Market. Boone's Trail wound up from Kentucky, haunted by hunger, hope, and hunters moving quiet through the hills. By the time Oliver arrived in 1810, the battles had shifted from fields to courtrooms. But the land still remembered. Settlers still found arrowheads in their plowed fields, flint flakes, tomahawk stones. Signs that no matter how many treaties were signed, the old paths were never truly empty. Oliver didn't write much about it. Instead, he recorded travelers without names, neighbors hearing strange things in the woods, nights when the stillness sat wrong. When Oliver walked the ridges, he knew storms had a taste to them. He knew when a visitor was coming, even before the knock. He lived in a place stitched together by old trails and older memories. The last years came slow. In his final entries, his hand grew spare, but his faith stayed sure. Oh, that the Lord would be merciful to me and grant me relief from suffering. May 5th, 1845. 10 days later, Oliver Harris was gone, and his son Robert wrote the final words. He said he was happy. Very happy, though, very sick. He said he was with Jesus Christ already. He never moved anymore, but his breath remained 12 hours. At 7 o'clock in the evening he died, May 15th, 1845. They buried him the next day. The preacher spoke from Revelation 14:13. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord. Oliver lived at the crossroads, where sugar groves became cemeteries, where schoolhouses gave way to homes, where a wagon lent to a neighbor became a bond. He never spoke of legacy. He didn't know his words would be read 2 centuries later. But maybe, in some quiet way, he wrote them for us. Not for monuments, but to be remembered. Because it's not the road that matters, it's the people who walked it. The ones who stayed. The ones who carried it forward. And if you listen long enough near the cemetery or where the school once stood, you might just hear it. That old story, still walking. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more incredible stories. Until next time, happy hunting.